Chapter 175, Shakedown. They used to conduct shakedowns of the whole prison every few months. This massive search would sometimes destroy all of our property, and we would lose precious valuables like family pictures and letters. They were supposedly searching for weapons, but would only confiscate contraband from the black, brown, and red slaves. The white slaves got to keep their knives and tattoo guns. We were able to purchase 5-inch transparent TVs on Canteen, with the color version costing around $225 and a black and white around $120. They were transparent, so we couldn't hide anything in it. The prison system, with its $225 5-inch TVs and expensive canteen and phone calls, was a racket designed to suck more funds out of our communities and transfer it to the poor rural communities to keep them alive. They were doing a good job at it, and we were also doing a good job helping them unwittingly. We were all able to afford the TVs after some Lorton legal scholars filed and settled a class action lawsuit for cruel and unusual punishment against CCA in Youngstown, Ohio. The settlement was for $2.4 million. This put up to $600 in everyone's account that was at that prison, and again demolished CCA's profit margin. Because Red Onion was a Virginia state prison, the cell block was mostly guys from all over Virginia: Norfolk, Tidewater, Hampton, Richmond, Virginia Beach, etc. It was a few young guys there from Asian gangs also. One of them was my partner, a 19-year-old from Cambodia that I called Cambodia. His cellie was a Vietnamese that I called Viet Cong. One day Cambodia came to my cell and told me Viet Cong had to get up out of his cell or he would kill him. Tonight. He called home and told his family where his cellie was from, and they gave him a history lesson and told him not to share cells with him. In 1978, the Vietnamese invaded and occupied Cambodia for 10 years, removing the Khmer Rouge government after years of military skirmishes. Tens of thousands of people died in the invasion. Now, over 2 decades later and almost 9,000 miles away, tensions still flared and the battle was still raging. But now, I was somewhat in the middle of it. If either one of them killed the other, they would get the death penalty. So I asked Viet Cong if he wouldn't mind trading cells with another 19-year-old kid from Newport News, because the young people would rather be amongst each other. At first he was hesitant, but at 35 and living with a teenage lifer wasn't easy, so he agreed, and this potential international-based killing was diffused. His new cellie was a 32-year-old from Richmond. The Richmond and the Newport News guys wasn't getting along either. Chapter 180, Haircut Memorandum. A week later, the overseers posted a memorandum informing us that we all had 30 days to cut our hair and beards. Religion didn't matter. Muslims had to cut their beards and Rastafarians had to cut their dreads. Native Americans, whose hair sometimes had been growing for 30 plus years, had to cut their hair. Men with cornrows, braids, bushes, and ponytails all had to cut their wisdoms. They claimed there was a security issue which trumped constitutional protections. The memorandum came from the governor's office. Any refusal to follow these unconstitutional orders would require them to strap us down and forcibly cut it. I had dreads, and I had no intention of cutting my hair because I was ordered by some crazy white people. It wasn't going to happen. I silently wondered, was this in response to Ty's attack on the captain in Sussex 1? Where they still couldn't figure out how he got the 7-inch steel knife into the prison? And me being caught with a knife in my hair going to Ohio? Did they think I got the knife into the prison for Ty? In the governor's mandate, they mentioned the possibility of contraband being smuggled in through thick hair. Most people here in the Supermax didn't get haircuts because we had no reason to. No one was getting visits, and we couldn't take pictures to send our loved ones. 99% of the population were men serving life sentences, with the exception of me. I was the only one on the compound serving a parole violation. And usually, when administration sent a parole violator to a supermax, it was either to get you killed, or hopefully you kill someone and get a life sentence. I was well aware and thinking ahead of them. They claimed my criminal record didn't reflect how dangerous I was, so they made an exception to have me sent to a supermax. It was reminiscent of the case I caught at 17 years old and the judge rejecting the Youth Act recommendations and sentencing me to adult time. He also said I was too dangerous, but he was far more dangerous than I was. As the 30 days to the haircut mandate got closer, beards, dreads, cornrows, ponytails, and braids were voluntarily being cut daily. The overseers were aggressively approaching the slaves who were holding out and letting them know what would happen if they refused. They never said anything to me. By day 29, I was the last man left. I was the last man on a compound with hair, a head full of hair, a full beard. Just to spit in their faces, I would comb my beard out to make it look super thick and step so hard that my thick dreads would bounce. The overseers finally came to my cell asking would I cut my hair. I laughed at them. Do what you gotta do, 'cause I ain't cutting nothing. They told me to pack my property. I was going to the hole where they would forcibly cut it. I told them, it's already packed. I never unpacked it. Let's go. I'm ready. They told me they'll be back in an hour. They never returned. A 30-day reprieve was granted for DC prisoners as lawyers filed for an exemption for us, saying it shouldn't apply since technically we weren't owned by Virginia's slave masters, but DC's slave masters. So for the next 30 days, I was the only person on the whole compound with a thick head of hair and a full beard. The family of overseers were pissed. I was not only an anomaly, but I represented defiance. One of the officers told me that every time they saw me, they felt like their authority was being spat on. I smiled. That was an honor. A few younger guys who were incensed at themselves for bowing to the pressure began growing their hair again. My defiance became problematic. The staff saw me as a reason for this. Now every time I walked to the chow hall, I could feel a gun barrel pointed at my head. Just to get to the chow hall, there was 5 armed officers facing you from different positions. Then once you got into the chow hall, there was another one in there. On the 29th day of the reprieve from the exemptions that the lawyers in DC filed for, it was denied. Everyone here had to be cut, including DC prisoners. The overseers asked once again would I comply, and I replied, no, ain't nothing changed. They told me I would have to serve the rest of my sentence in the hole. Didn't matter to me. This was a supermax. What difference is the hole? One thing they weren't going to do was cut my hair without an all-out bloody fight. I made that clear. The next morning, 6 officers were at my cell. I was instructed to cuff up. I was then escorted out of the cell block and across the compound. But I noticed that they weren't taking me to the hole. They were taking me somewhere else. I was mentally prepared for whatever they had planned. They took me through some back hallways and into a back room. I was stripped naked and searched by 5 hillbillies who seemed obsessed with staring at my penis. I was then taken into R&D, receiving and discharging. And to my surprise, it was 2 Department of Corrections officers from DC there to pick me up. I was being removed from the institution because I was the only one that didn't follow the rules, and they claimed I was encouraging a group demonstration. Sweet. I was again cuffed and shackled and placed into the back of a prison transport police car with a cage on it, to separate me from the two correctional officers up front. The driver was black and the passenger was a Hispanic. On the first 30 minutes of the 8-hour drive back to DC, flashing lights and the state trooper's siren blared behind us. The transport car pulled to the side to let the car pass, but the car pulled to the side behind us. The trooper then got on the bullhorn and yelled, "Pull over now." Both correctional officers immediately became nervous. Shit. Grab the registration for me and give me your ID just in case. I was intrigued by this scenery. They were fumbling around looking for their documents as a tall, white, tobacco-spitting redneck walked up to the car with his hand on his gun and said, "Let me see your license and registration." They handed over the paperwork and asked him what was the problem. They tried to explain that they were Department of Correction employees transporting a prisoner back to DC. Before they could finish, he cut them off and asked for their badge numbers and gun permits. They became more nervous, looking at each other for some sort of consolation. I was in the back seat laughing at this spectacle. Pigs harassing pigs. When he got the required paperwork, this loser walked away from the car with an air of arrogance reserved for people of importance. I started laughing louder. "So you all are not as tough as y'all portray, huh?"
Shut up.
"Oh, you telling me to shut up? Bet you won't tell him that." I laughed out loud at them. Cowards. He's a cop like you. You don't have to explain nothing to him. They were quiet and nervous and asking me not to agitate the redneck. They wanted to make it home to their families. Oh, interesting. 5 minutes later, the redneck came back to the car and spat a wad of tobacco on the ground. "Listen here. This here is my town. Anytime you come here, I want you boys to check in with me first. You hear me?" He called them boys. The Latino officer tried to explain to him, "We are returning this prisoner. I don't care what you're doing. When you come in this here town, you check with me first. Do I make myself clear?" I was bracing myself. They better not call him sir. "Yes, sir." I shook my head. Punks. The redneck aggressively handed them their paperwork back and told them that he would be following them all the way to the end of his county's jurisdiction. They immediately tightened their seatbelts, put on the indicator, and pulled off slowly. They drove below the speed limit the whole way while continuously glancing in the rearview mirror. I couldn't resist giving both of those officers hell for a couple of hours straight. Y'all cops. How y'all let another cop talk to y'all like that? They were so embarrassed that they wouldn't even respond. They just stared ahead. Reality was that they were just as powerless as I was. Reality was that they were just pawns on this chessboard and they knew it. Reality was they were working for their own enemy. An enemy that despised them more than they despised me. At least they had some form of respect for me. That's why I was in cuffs. They were free, and they had weapons and authority. But the Peckerwood knew they were cowards just by their demeanor. Yet y'all play tough towards us though. Y'all quick to get deep and jump one of us, then press charges and add 10 more years to our sentences. But that cracker just emasculated y'all. Y'all badge didn't mean anything to him. They didn't respond. They just stared ahead as my words were demolishing their fragile eardrums. In the grand scheme of things, cops are nobodies. Nobody's trying to stop somebody from doing something. That's all y'all are and ever was. I laughed at my beautifully crafted and witty metaphors while laughing at them. Cold bitches. That's the perfect description of y'all. Cold bitches. I can't wait to tell everybody this one. They wouldn't reply. Even if they wanted to reply, they couldn't reply. They sat in silence as the car drove for hours in enemy territory. We were deep in Virginia. It's not safe in most places in America for a black man, but deep Virginia may be in the top 5. So to a certain extent, I understood their hesitancy and restraint. But I still gave them hell because they were government employees and armed. Bitch ass niggas. After a few more minutes of digging in their shit, I went into my own introspection while staring out the window. I needed a solid plan to stay out of prison once that day arrives. I needed to get my cash that I left stashed in my house. The house was confiscated and auctioned off by the government. It was now owned by Bank of America. I shook my head at the thought, then uttered to them one more time. Cold bitches. Chapter 182. Cold bitches. I was transported back to Lawton. Maximum security, aka behind the wall, aka Berlin, aka the snake pit. This was my 3rd time here. The officers walked me into the R&D cage and took off the shackles and handcuffs. They were humble. Every time I tried to look them in their eyes, they would drop theirs. They were quiet and reserved. As one of them were taking off my belly chains, I whispered in his ear, "You a cold bitch." He didn't respond. And as they were leaving, I yelled out to them one last time. Cold bitches. They never looked back.